Good evening, everybody. It's fantastic to see so many of you here this evening, and a huge welcome to the January edition of our Winter Warmer online talk series, which is aimed at bringing you something a bit different during these freezing winter months and to highlight and showcase different features of our wonderful Royal Parks. So my name's Richard Perring. I'm the Senior Learning Manager at the Royal Parks, and we are the charity that looks after the 8 Royal Parks in London. So these are Hyde Park, Kensington Gardens, the Green Park, St James's Park, Regent's Park with Primrose Hill, Bushy Park, Greenwich Park and Richmond Park. And we also manage the incredible Brompton Cemetery and Victoria Tower Gardens as well. So that's about 5,000 acres of green space across London in total. And through our work, we aim to welcome Londoners and visitors to London alike so that everyone can enjoy the spectacular nature and the fascinating heritage that the parks have to offer and their well-being benefits. And also, we work to protect and improve the precious biodiversity of the parks across London. We're putting this series of talks on for free because we want to share our enthusiasm and our love for these spaces, these special places, with as many people as possible. And we're delighted to welcome so many of you to join this evening. The Royal Parks is a charity, so while this talk is free to join, we would greatly appreciate any donation that you can make to support our work to look after these amazing spaces. And I'll put a link in the chat in a moment if you'd like to do that. So without further ado, I would like to introduce tonight's guest speaker. So Daniela Briscoe-People is Partnership and Community Engagement Officer for Greenwich Park. And with our partners on the Greenwich Park Revealed project, she's working to create exciting and engaging events, learning sessions and activities for visitors to the park throughout the year. And she's also supporting the project team to ensure that events taking place in the park can be made as accessible as possible for all park users, and to invite people to experience the park in new ways, or hopefully even visit for the first time. She's got a background in the heritage and museum sector, focusing on communications and heritage advocacy. And she started a career as a teacher. She's supported learning programs as a volunteer, and most recently volunteering at the Horniman Museum and Gardens. And she has a master's degree in museum studies and a BA in classics. So we're all very lucky, I think, to be spending an hour getting Daniela's perspective from the very centre of the action in Greenwich Park. So Daniela, I will pass over to you.
Thanks very much, Richard. Thank you all so much for joining the call. It's brilliant to see so many names on here so far. I'll just share my screen. So hopefully this will warm you all up, or at least get you a bit enthusiastic about the park this year, what we're planning to do at Greenwich, and also maybe whet your appetite for some of the other events that we've got coming up across the Royal Parks this year and in coming years. It's such a fascinating place to work, and I'm really, really honoured to be able to do this and be here with you all. So again, thank you for your time. So restoring Greenwich Park. Interesting question. So we're going to dive into this one now. So just an introduction to myself, first of all. As Richard said, I'm Partnership and Community Engagement Officer, which always seems like quite a mouthful. I always seem to get something and something as my title. So just to break that down a little bit, I work with lots of kind of community groups and volunteers and local partner organisations, as well as people across the Royal Parks teams and other kind of local organisations, to put on events and activities in the park. So we're exploring what we can do as part of Greenwich Park Revealed. I took over from the lovely Helen Wallace last year. So I've been in the role for just under a year now, so it's coming up to a year. And it's been really exciting to meet so many of you so far. I'm sure I know some faces and names on the call anyway. And it's lovely every time we have another event, we're seeing new people, and we get to kind of understand more stories and more kind of connections to the park. That's the bit that I am really interested and excited about learning more. So why people come to the park, what draws them back each time. There are different things for different people, which we can have a little look at. And I always think it's really interesting speaking to people and understanding why they have such a strong connection potentially, or why they may be indifferent. And maybe we can change that, or we can do something that makes the park feel kind of more open. and more welcoming, and kind of have a different offer over time, because there's so much that we can do, which is fantastic as part of this big project. My personal connection with the park has been a very long one. I remember a time when I didn't know that I was going to be coming back to Greenwich Park at some point. I don't remember a time when I didn't realise what it was. So it's definitely been a long time. My granddad used to say that he'd have to walk up the hill down from where his mum lived in Greenwich to the top of the hill to go to the John Rowan School, and he'd come up the hill in like the cold and the frost and the mist. So it was always quite a dramatic journey for him when he was a child. And then I experienced a similar thing, I think, when I was very lucky and was able to do, as part of a gifted and talented programme, astronomy GCSE at the Royal Observatory with Tony Sizer, which is, I think, something I'll always cherish. It was really, really exciting. But again, kind of trekking up the hill, because I didn't realise there were slightly flatter paths you can take, slightly flatter. They're always steep, but it was slightly flatter, and was always kind of going straight up the observatory hill path and then straight in, and always a little bit glowing at the top. But it's always, it's such an exciting place to be, and there's always so many kind of different perspectives, and there's so much that you can learn about one place. I think every time we come back every week, there's something new. Someone has a different story, someone has a different memory to share, and that's what I think is really interesting. So for this talk, it's quite a big title, Restoring Greenwich Park, and it's kind of unpacking what that means. I can't kind of answer every single question about the park. I think there's just too many. And there are lots of different people working across the Greenwich Park Revealed team, but also more widely in the Greenwich Park team. We're very small but very mighty, and there's lots of expertise. And then across the Royal Parks as well, where people can answer more kind of specific questions. But from my perspective, it's really interesting to think about what will Greenwich Park Revealed as a project mean for users of the park. What changes can people expect to see in the coming years? So I can give you a bit of insight and a bit of an indication of what you can expect from my side. And how can we share stories and memories of the park and enhance the experiences of Greenwich Park's local communities and visitors? There are loads of local communities and visitors. It's very broad. The park sits within 3 big boroughs as well. I mean, if you think about how it crosses over, and it sits kind of within lots of different wards and lots of local areas, and lots of people see it as their local park, although it's quite a big, grand space, and there's lots of parts to it, and it's not, it's not the kind of typical park in a sense. So it's understanding what people's are, connections and feelings are about it. And how we can kind of help to share those as well and capture them, because it's really fascinating from my perspective. So, as I say, restoring Greenwich Park, what does that mean? For us, as part of the project, it means researching and highlighting the park's layered history. It means improving what the park offers for people in the present. So what changes can we make that really have an impact now and are meaningful now? And how do we preserve the park's nature and heritage for future generations? There are so many kind of different things that we're doing, and it's really interesting to be able to kind of explore those and think about how they can make an impact for people and for nature and for wildlife. So when I think about users of the park, I think about everything that possibly uses the park. So there's a really lovely picture here of a damselfly that Anna in our volunteering team took. I think I've got a few pictures of hers because her photographs are lovely. In my slides today, so you'll see quite some really pretty pictures coming up, but it's all of these kind of connections that we have and things that we see and things we encounter when we're at the parks, all kind of build up those experiences for us. So I've skipped over the fact that I think I had a picture on my first slide, which was the Henry Moore sculpture, which is Knife Edge, which is something that I hadn't seen in the park. I mean, it's not kind of completely tucked away, but I think I hadn't seen it until much later, when I was visiting, and I found it so fascinating that there's a Henry Moore sculpture in the park, and it's one of my favourite viewpoints. It's just such a beautiful kind of tranquil spot, and there are so many different views. I think the wolf statue view gets a lot of attention, but there are so many beautiful viewpoints across the park. You could be walking down, towards One Tree Hill and past where the Roman burial, sorry, not Roman burial mounds, where the Roman temple remains are, and there's a really beautiful view going down the hill that way. You can go down Crooms Hill on the left, if you're coming from the top of the park, which confusingly is south, and the bottom's north. which confuses all of us. So if you're coming down that way as well, so every kind of twist and turn, I think, of the park offers something quite different. You get really beautiful foxes. So there's a fox there in the flower garden with this really lovely wildflower mix that the gardeners have managed to put in. So Tom and the gardening team have done a really lovely job of introducing lots of sort of different planting schemes and thinking about how that can really benefit nature over time. So I'll be thinking about that in this. And we've got artists of residence projects. So there have been some really interesting pieces of work that have been produced over time, especially in connection with the Friends of Greenwich Park, who are a really lovely charity that we work with as well, really in support of the park and what we're doing. So there are all these lovely spaces, and in the middle there, so you've got the sleeping giant is the kind of big sculpture on the floor, big wooden sculpture, and then in the middle at the bottom is the Queen's Orchard, which I think is a lovely space again, and the gates are on the right hand side. Is a really beautiful space that some people just have never seen before, and don't necessarily know is open during the summer months to just visit when you like. There's a lovely group of volunteers who maintain that space, and we really make sure that, you know, with staff and with lovely Ash who's usually down there and Jerome, that the space is really looked after and maintained, and all these sorts of different spaces sit in the park and kind of offer slightly different things for people. So there are so many different kind of aspects, I think, of the park that some people may be nodding along are completely familiar with all of this, and some of these things you may not have seen, or you may not have had the same experience. So have you seen a fox in the daylight? Have you seen a fox in the evening? Because of the dark evenings before the park closes at 6 now, you sometimes see eyes along with, you know, dogs with their like light up collars or something, and you see them bouncing, and that's probably all you can see. So yeah, it's really interesting to be at the park at different times and see what's on offer and see what's there. It's usually a different experience each time. The big question, I guess, at the beginning of the talk, which I'm going to look at and try and explore, is what will Greenwich Park Revealed mean for users of the park? And I found the question about users of the park really interesting because there are so many different users over time. It wasn't necessarily a park at that point, but as I mentioned before, there's the Roman temple remains. So this is a kind of artist's impression from after the Time Team dig in 1999, from, you know, what that could have looked like. And then on the right is an aerial shot showing where the Saxon Barrow Cemetery is. So these sort of really kind of prominent burial mounds that you can see when where we had the really dry period in the park with this aerial view, which was really fascinating, something that has completely been revealed to us from the top in this way, although excavations have happened over time, to have a look at, you know, what happened there and what you can find. But I find it really interesting thinking about these stories and these connections, and, you know, there would be things from before then as well. But, you know, when we start to get evidence of people being in the park over time, what does that mean? And what would they have been doing, and what are their connections? And we were sort of discussing how people may have found respites if they're kind of coming from, I say, Roman London, for example. You're kind of coming through and you're taking a spot there, and it may have been a place to have a rest and have a drink and kind of recalibrate almost. And also it's a high spot, you know, it's a place to be able to view things and to be able to see things. And I think we still all kind of feel that, and, you know, have the same connections and maybe the same thoughts and feelings as people did all the way back in sort of Roman and Saxon times and beyond. So I find that's a really nice way to sort of begin this journey. There's also a layered history in terms of the voices and the people who've shaped the park over time. So there's been people who have come in and kind of deliberately shaped the park in certain ways as a park. So I think many of you will know about the Tudor history of the park, or at least will know that there was a palace that was at the sort of bottom of the park. So the palace in Greenwich, the Palace of Placentia, was the home to Henry VIII, and he was born in Greenwich. His two daughters, Mary the First and Elizabeth the First, were buried here. Born here, not buried, born here. And had lots of there were lots of different connections about how they use the park over time, which I find really interesting. So you've got this sort of really rich kind of royal history, and it's quite an imposed upon kind of, this is what the park looks like, and this is how this space is going to be used for kind of pleasure garden or for hunting grounds, or as a kind of a specific royal space that was to be enjoyed by those people only, essentially. The Stuarts transformed the park by putting a fence and then a brick wall around it, so that it becomes a kind of enclosed space. And then Charles II commissioned a kind of big grand plan to kind of transform the way that the park would look so that it became more fashionable. And some of those landscape features that he put in, you can still see evidence of today, about 350 years later, which is really interesting. So for us, there are so many kind of layers of history, but you can see them. There's evidence of them every time something happens, or every time something's impacted the park. There's a trace that's left behind. So in terms of the physicality and the physical aspects of the park, they're all there. So part of the project is revealing some of those, and that can be through interpretation or thinking about what's been kind of transformed over time and why, and who's traditionally had a say as to what the park looks like, and how things have been formed, and then think about what we can do now to make sure that we're preserving it in the best way possible, but also introducing some new things as well, which suit us in the modern day, which is fascinating. So I have a question, which is, what is your first memory of the park? Which is not one necessarily for me to answer. So if you'd like to, you're more than welcome to put in the meeting chat or have a think to yourself about what your first memory of the park may have been. And if it's, if you've never visited the park before, what's your impression of the park? I assume most of you are kind of very familiar with the park and very keen, but you may also be here thinking about your next visit and what you do, or maybe part of your daily routine. But if you can think back, what's your first memory? For me, as I said, every visit is meaningful, and we always bring our own perspectives and our own stories, our own histories to the park. We have our own family stories and our own connections, and there are lots and lots of visitors every year. It's really interesting for me because we had a kind of favourite tree video that went out recently. So mine was the mulberry tree in the Queen's Orchard, but I also think that people tend to have a favourite place and a favourite tree. So I think I've shared those ones. But recently it's been really interesting to hear about people's pet names for different areas of the park. So Andrew heard about Plum Pudding Hill for the Saxon Barrow Cemetery, which is lovely, as a kind of really unusual name, but it definitely looks like this kind of pudding forms in the picture that I showed earlier. Maybe you've spotted a new plant or wildlife species in the park. Maybe you've heard a new piece of music, or something that you wouldn't have expected to encounter at the bandstand concerts that we've had, so either run by the Friends or by us in the past few years. Maybe you stopped to touch the bark of a tree in the flower garden, or smelled something lovely, or maybe not so lovely, who knows, in the park. So there's so many kind of layers to all of our experiences. So if you'd like to share it, you're more than welcome. I'm going to talk about a few different stories actually, that I find really interesting in terms of perspective. So we're still sort of following a chronology. So these are in time order. This one I find really interesting. So quite a jump away from kind of the earlier experiences of the park. But this is in 1753 and 1787 is Phyllis's time, which is still quite early. If you're thinking about the park's history. Phyllis Wheatley was an American author. She's come over from America to London on a visit, and she's thought to be the first Black woman to publish a book of poetry in Britain. And she, on her visit to London, is being shown around by an acquaintance, a Grenville Sharp Esquire, and she's writing to someone called Colonel David Worcester about her experience. And she says that she's been shown the Tower of London. So she's got attended me to the Tower. I showed lions, panthers, and tigers. because there were big cats being kept at the time in lots of different places in London. But the Tower was a kind of really, there's a thing to see. The horse armory, small armory, crowns, sceptres, diadems, the font for christening the royal family. So used to be seeing the crown jewels on her visit, which many people do as their kind of big, visit to to London even now. She sort of speaks about seeing Westminster Abbey, British Museum, Cott's Museum, Sadler's Wells. And then she talks about coming to Greenwich and seeing Greenwich Hospital, Park and Chapel, the Royal Observatory, and too many things and places to trouble you with in a letter. But it's really interesting that she picks those specific places out, and she specifically talks about coming to the park. But I find it really interesting thinking about what her impression of the park would have been at that time and what she would have seen. So we often associate the park, when we have lots of pictures of the park at the moment, we see the General Wolfe statue and that viewpoint, but that wouldn't have existed at that time. That was sort of about 200 years earlier. So I find it really interesting thinking about what she would have seen on her visit. There's a really, I think Andrew's done some really interesting research, and there's been lots of interesting historical research by different groups, especially as well the Friends History Group, around the history of the park. And there's a really great illustration on the left from 1749 in London Magazine of the park. And I find it interesting that it just looks so perfect. It's very kind of laid out and specific, and I think that's very much in keeping with the aesthetic of what a parkland was supposed to look like at that time. So kind of less wild in some ways. And then this map of 1754, which sort of shows Middlesex and the Isle of Dogs, and the way that was seen, and with the river kind of flowing through. So there's those connections there, but also there's quite a big difference. So I've highlighted there the kind of the absence of something at the top of the hill there that we'd expect to see. It's just really, really interesting to kind of understand what that may have been like at the time and how people viewed the park at the time. We've got, so if we're following chronology, so imagine Phyllis is there in sort of the 1730s. And then Charles Ignatius Sancho was another really important figure in the park's history, and someone who we've been exploring the stories of more recently in lots of our kind of communications, and we'll be doing more in our interpretation that's coming up, because he's quite an extraordinary person in Greenwich. And also Queen Caroline of Brunswick. So they both have really interesting stories and histories that haven't necessarily been, as explored as they could have been in some of the work we've done. So we're really looking to kind of unpack their stories now. So as a kind of brief overview, if you haven't heard of either of these figures before, Ignatius Sancho was a polymath, so a sort of composer, writer, slave abolitionist, and did some acting as well, apparently. So he had quite a tragic start to his life, but he formed a connection with the Duke of Montague, who lived in Montague House, which used to be on the edge of the park. And he made a connection with his family, and he lived there and received more of a cultural education, because it was picked up that he was really bright, and really quite talented in lots of different ways, so musically and with writing, and with acting. I don't know how successful he was in that as well, but there are records of him sort of doing lots, and there's lots of music that he composed that's sort of been recently rediscovered, and people have started to play, and we'll be exploring a little more hopefully in some of our events this year too. He later became the first Black person to vote in Britain, it's supposed, and he voted I think 3 times, and also to have his letters published. He raised a family with his wife Anne Osborne in Westminster, so he sort of moved on, and they started a shop, so he ran his own business, and his son William transformed the family shop into a sort of printers and publishing venture. So after his father's letters were published a few times, he himself published the 5th edition of his dad's letters, so the 5th edition of Sancho's letters in 1803. I just think it's a really interesting kind of view into Queen Caroline's view of Greenwich and what that would have been like, and how she would have experienced also living in the same location. So in Montague House, as the Princess of Wales. She became a park ranger at Montague House and lived separately from her husband, who was the Prince of Wales at the time, and later became George the Fifth. So sorry, George the Fourth. And she enclosed the park as part of a sort of an extension of her garden. And there's a really interesting story about her, after kind of her separation from her husband, trying to go to his coronation and not being able to go into Westminster Abbey and having the doors shut in her face as she attempted to enter. So really two very interesting figures and very, very different in their lives. And now, we have these two kind of memorial plaques to them on the wall at the site where Montague House was, and the remains of Queen Caroline's bath. So when you see Queen Caroline's bath along that path just on the way to the Rose Garden, that's what this is referring to. So there's really interesting stories there and really interesting histories. I may have fumbled over some of the dates and facts, but this is more to kind of show that there are so many different kind of connections over time, and these are some of the stories that we're looking at sort of retelling and making sure that people are aware of, because they've been such kind of famous histories in Greenwich's history so far. Another really famous bit of Greenwich Park's history was Greenwich Fair. So this was a kind of quite wild fair with lots of things going on and lots of things happening in the park, and just crowds and crowds of people coming in over Easter weekend. And that ran right through the time of Ignatius Sancho and Caroline of Brunswick. So I imagine what they must have seen potentially at the time as well. And then it ran up until 1857, when they decided it was a bit too much potentially for Greenwich. But Charles Dickens, so the very famous English novelist, began sort of writing short pieces and humorous sketches, and one of these was called Sketches by Boz. So he'd use that as a kind of a pen name, Boz, and he wrote about Greenwich Fair and said that the whole of the park was in a state of perpetual bustle and noise, and he talks about just everything coming to the park and just people being absolutely crammed in, and people just having a very, very good time, clearly. So it's really interesting to think about, what do we think about the park? Some people like the quiet maybe, and getting respite, and finding somewhere to sit and read, or to sit and kind of reflect. People use it as a chance to kind of get together, and it's a nice space to reconnect. Maybe, find your favorite bench and sit there, or walk your dog, or come in with your children, or come in with your family members, or just come in by yourself and use that as a time to kind of clear your head. But other times there will be big events going on. There will be lots of people there, and sometimes that's what makes it really fun too. I know that there's loads of people who remember coming to the park and sitting down and having a drink with their friends, or kind of exploring things and playing games, and using it as a really lovely kind of big open space. And clearly people have been doing that for a very long time too. So I find that's a really interesting kind of connection. And then we have our modern view. This is always changing. There are so many new buildings, and I'm sure there are lots of people on the call who remember, not seeing certain buildings be in the skyline, and then suddenly they're there. And there are some that kind of remain constant, like the Queen's House, I guess, through lots of these stories. So I find all of that very, very interesting. But obviously the landscape has changed over time as well, and there are certain things that kind of happen. So it's sort of trying to bring all of those different aspects together when we think about what the park means, and what we'd be revealing through this project. So it's a big investment in the parks. It's a community funded and Heritage Fund funded project through Parks for People, but it's also funded by the Royal Parks as a big flagship project for the charity. So as Richard said, the charity looks after the sort of 8 royal parks, and it's sort of an independent charity, and I think it's a really interesting project as a flagship project in Greenwich, that we're sort of getting this first, and there'll be kind of more projects and more involvement in different parks over time. But it's really thinking about investment in people and what we're doing to be able to make sure that these spaces are as thriving as possible and as accessible as possible, kind of going into the future. So there's a big kind of master plan for Greenwich Park Revealed, which includes lots of elements. It involves heritage landscape restoration, tree avenue restoration, enhancing viewpoints. These are just, I mean, some aspects of it. I don't think all of them, but improving water quality, creating kind of more welcoming spaces, but including, you know, preserving wild grasslands, wildlife surveys, habitat creation, restoring the flower garden lake, which I'll talk about, wildlife friendly planting, and creating new community spaces. So there's lots in this, and it's quite a big kind of broad project, as I think lots of people will be aware, and there's lots of information on the website about all these different aspects. There is the kind of big phase now that we're in, so it's the kind of delivery phase. So I've definitely come in at the busy time, when the park's sort of being transformed, and there've been lots of little kind of projects happening leading up to the kind of final projects for this year. So in terms of, you know, physical things happening to the park, things changing. So in kind of autumn, winter, just gone the last couple of months, and then into and up to spring, there are these big kind of parterre, tree avenues and banks. So at the very bottom, where the kind of orange square is, the works are kind of happening there at the moment, and up on the Grand Descent, and then the General Wolfe statue and public space, if we're working backwards from there. The Pavilion Cafe is now being renovated, which is really exciting, so we'll see what happens there, and there is a lovely little kiosk there in the meantime, and there's more to come, which I'll talk about in terms of kind of provisions. And then Blackheath Gate will be getting a bit of a facelift as well, which is really, really exciting. So in terms of landscape restoration, this is the thing I think that people think about for Greenwich Park Revealed straight away if they know about the project. So they think about the Grand Descent, which is, you know, this kind of really big, beautiful design feature, which you can kind of see in the left-hand side picture is still there, but it has massively eroded over time. And part of the project is to restore this, but also enhance that landscape feature. So these big terraces will be going back in and lined with really beautiful hawthorn trees, and it creates new habitat on kind of both sides. So there'll be more planting, and areas will be kind of closed off so that it's better for lots of different kind of wildlife to flourish and thrive in that area, because there is obviously kind of a big public bank below, and we're trying to kind of introduce this as a space that could be used maybe for events in the future, installations and that kind of thing. So watch this space, essentially. It's happening now. I'm sure if you've been in the park recently, you've seen the works have started. We're all quite excited to see what this looks like. Should be coming up very soon. There's also improved public spaces. So as I said on the right, this is a kind of artist's impression of what the kind of opened up space will look like by the Wolfe statue and by the sort of Grand Descent viewpoint. So it's going to feel much more open. There's going to be more space, and there's lots of kind of reuse of existing materials to make this a really lovely kind of open and flat space, so it still feels as beautiful as it did, but hopefully in an enhanced way, without some of the kind of bare grass and kind of slightly worn out features. So we're really, really excited to see what this will look like. It's going to be such a moment and such a big and kind of refreshed public space for people to be able to use and enjoy for years to come, that we just haven't had the enjoyment of so far. So they're just really enhancing everyone's experience. And on the left, there's again the kind of impression, it's slightly different, I think, maybe in the final plans, but an impression of what some of our new kind of public spaces will look like. So behind the tree line, if you came into the top corner of the park, especially if you're coming from Charlton and that kind of end and up by Maze Hill, the kind of, it used to just be yard, so kind of nursery yard and working areas, and some of that is being opened up, so it's being brought back into the park. It's becoming more public space than we've had before, and there was a kind of existing residential lodge, which is being turned into a beautiful new cafe, which we're really excited about. I can't wait because I think I want to time it and see if it's closer to get to that one than the other one from the office. So we'll have 2 cafes in the park, which is really exciting. It's a beautiful space. I think anyone who's been walking by there can see it shaping up now, and it's really opened up that corner of the park and that view kind of into what the kind of that yard area would have been, but now has been completely transformed. There's a really lovely greenhouse going in, and has quite a Victorian feel. It's really beautiful, and raised beds, and we're hoping to use some of that for community engagement. And there's new volunteer facilities going in, and really importantly as well as the sort of new visitor and volunteer facilities in that space, we're putting in a changing places and a really lovely big toilet block. So it's providing more and more for people to be able to use the park and have more there to be able to offer for lots of different kind of users of the park, and make sure that people have the provisions they need. So I'm really delighted that that's taking place. And we'll have some outdoor seating and some really lovely areas for people to be able to enjoy. So it's really about kind of shaping those spaces so that there's more for visitors. We're also increasing the amount of green space. So as part of that project, at the kind of bottom where the tree is, that's kind of being opened up, and you can see that there's going to be kind of more planting, more schemes, as where we're able to, more trees can go in where we're able to put them, which is really lovely. So a Blackheath gate entrance to the top of the park, there'll be more trees going in, and some of the grass verges, so kind of the bit alongside where the car park is at the end, will be kind of opened up a little bit more, so it'll be more green and more lush. So when you kind of come into the park, it feels more like you're entering a park, which would be really beautiful. And on the left is a picture of where the path was removed through the Saxon Barrow Cemetery. So it is a scheduled monument, and it was unfortunate, as Andrew was saying in a lot of his talks as well, to have a pathway going through that, but they did excavate when it was removed to sort of see what was there and what's there underneath. So on that top level. It's a really interesting project, and every time we do work, Andrew's able to sort of go in with a small team of volunteers and experts and have a look to see what's there, and what can we learn about people in the park's history, and what can we learn about the kind of landscape as we do little projects like this. So it was quite a kind of big, and as I'm sure all the archaeology volunteers will say, it was quite a big project, as they all are in terms of the amount of work and time and energy that goes into doing these. But I think it's for a really good cause, and it's just lovely to see that being kind of grasped over back again, and they're sort of bringing everything back to the park as much as possible. This kind of supports lots of improvements for nature. So we have this lovely phrase of tree avenues fit for future generations. So more lime and elm trees are being planted. They're really good for wildlife, so they support lots of different kind of moss species. They're really good for ladybirds and beetles. They attract birds. And lime trees also provide nectar and pollen for native bee species. So if you ever kind of walk along, especially at the bottom towards sort of St Mary's Gate and St Mary's Lodge at the bottom of the park, so that's a White Lodge building, and there are lime trees down there, and you often see bees along that space, which is lovely. And there are so many different species of bee that live in the park and kind of use the park, so the more we can provide habitats for all of those different species, it's really brilliant. And also for elm trees, so we're kind of bringing what's slightly more resistant elm trees, and making sure that all of the trees that are there are going to last for a really long time, and they're going to be really healthy. And elm trees are really good for the white letter hair-streaked butterfly. So we've got a picture of it there, which is a species that is endangered in the UK. So I know that the ecology teams are really excited to see if this will kind of improve habitats for many different kind of species, and ensuring that we can, as much as we can, maintain and support different species, especially where they're declining. Urban green spaces in London are really important for all of this. There's the one of the damselflies again. I've also seen really beautiful dragonflies. There was a really good year apparently for dragonflies last year, and unexpectedly. And it's really nice that we've had new water bodies going into the park, and we can see that they're already using them and enjoying them. So hopefully that continues for a long time. Many of you will remember, because there were sort of closures in the flower garden to do this work. The flower garden lake has been restored. The water quality has been improved. There's lovely planting that's gone round. So that's a really lovely project that has been able to deliver so much in such a beautiful space in the park, and will really make sure that, again, there are sort of increasing improvements for nature, and that all of these spaces are doing as much as they can. So in consultation with tree experts in our teams, and experts in ecology, and experts in sort of, as much as we can, supporting biodiversity in a London park. A lot of these decisions are being made so that these species can thrive alongside all of us using the parks, which is really good. So one of the big projects that is going on, that we've spoken lots about, and I think it's one of the lovely kind of aspects of the project that people like to talk about, is community archaeology. So Andrew, in the middle there with the view behind him, is kind of has been leading across the project lots of different community archaeology projects. I think he's been averaging around 15 volunteers a day working on the Grand Descent digs, the most recent one, which is really, really exciting. And there's been so much that we've learned about the park through some of this excavation. So I definitely encourage you to look up Andrew's blogs. I think he's probably on the call somewhere as well, lurking in the background, and also videos and other content that's come up. And he also did a winter warmer talk last year, which was really good and really informative. So it's definitely worth exploring some more of this history. But it's just so fascinating to see some of these scans of the whole site. So the air raid shelter dig was the kind of earlier one in this year, which is in the top right hand corner, and it was amazing to see this World War II air raid shelter sort of come to life, that has been sort of tucked away in the park, and to again understand how people may have used that space, and what life was like at that time, for many people sort of living around the park in sort of World War I, during World War I and World War II. So that's part of the research that's been happening. And then also thinking about the magnetic observatory site, which is sort of at the bottom, and all those sort of connections historically with Greenwich Mean Time and observations, and how all of this was kind of thought about and connected, and how things have changed over time, lost buildings, and lots of things that I think people don't always realise that's sort of laying beneath the surface in the park. As part of community archaeology as well, there's all these really, really brilliant kind of finds that have come out. So really connecting with individual stories, and all these things that people would have had that they've dropped, or that have been left in the park over time, that give us an indication into how people's lives would have been. I think one of our favorites is the 007 Secret Service ring in the middle, because I wonder who dropped that, and what they were doing on that day. But there's lots, and it's really, really rich. So I definitely consider exploring more if that's of interest to you, and we'll be doing lots more of that. There's also historical research we do. So this is a few members of the Friends History Group and the Friends of Greenwich Park. And we've been working them quite closely to kind of uncover different stories, and to see how the park's been used over time. As part of the project as well, this is the kind of key focus of my work, is lots of new activities and events in the park. So many of you may have taken part in the sort of big Tai Chi, open air Tai Chi that we've had. They've all been really lovely free events, and that was run by Greenwich Dance. So we work with lots of different kind of event partners. And we've also had lots of offers for families, and we've had really, really lovely feedback so far, especially from even the past year, to say that the events have felt very friendly and inclusive, and that people are really excited to kind of see what else is coming up. Greenwich Arts and Arts Trust have sort of run lots of really interesting events. So as I said, there's been the Tai Chi, there's been Family Move and Play, which has been sort of outdoor for younger children. We had big skate jams in the park when it wasn't raining, because there's lots of rain last summer, and really, really fantastic kind of use of the spaces and thinking about how we can kind of bring different offers for different people on different days. Tramshed are a really good local partner as well that we work with. So they've done kind of big family film nights. They run youth workshops, and there are lots of young people who are engaged in sort of arts activities, and they've done a lot of sort of theatre workshops in the park, and kind of open sessions for people to kind of get involved in lots of different activities, which have been great. And also world music concerts on the bandstand, which, yeah, just really electrifying and interesting. Something very different. We also worked this year with Greenwich and Docklands International Festival. Really amazing project to be a part of, and it was so special to be able to kind of arrange and organise all of this. So hopefully, you know, we pulled it all off and it was very smooth. There's lots of elements that went into this, so it's really beautiful aerial performance, The Air Between Us, by two really, really beautiful and fantastic kind of performers. And there were lots of other events that were going on in the park, again, from really talented performers. And we're so sort of lucky to have such a kind of rich offer in the park over 3 days. There was also just a really lovely focus that we were able to provide with the GDIF, so with Greenwich and Docklands International Festival, for kind of disabled, deaf and neurodivergent artists. So working with people and making sure that everything could be as inclusive as possible. And making sure that we had a really good offer for everyone who was visiting as much as we could. So the park isn't the most accessible place, but doing certain things that we could try to see what, you know, how we could make improvements. And I think there's lots that we can learn from those events moving forward, and try and implement them in more and more than what we do. I also had an Orchard Open Day again, and this time sort of connected with Heritage Open Days, so exploring the history and heritage of the Queen's Orchard. And in terms of improving accessibility, we've done lots of interesting big projects to make sure that paths are flatter and more open, and we've got lots of lovely interpretation coming into the park. So hopefully, I think people have asked questions about this already, but there'll be lots of kind of new interpretation panels and boards going up around the park to explain different things about the park's history and viewpoints. So one of the first ones has already gone into One Tree Hill, which is nearly complete as a kind of brand new refreshed space in the park. So alongside the flower garden and One Tree Hill, there's lots more that's sort of been happening already, and we're really excited to see this all come together. So there'll be a big wave of kind of new information coming in to kind of help everyone with their experience and journey in the park. We also have a lovely buggy service. So I sort of manage a group of volunteers who run the service when they're available. So kind of over the weekend, so Friday, Saturday and Sunday so far, and we're bringing that back for the summer as well. So do look out for the kind of new buggy stops, and we'll be running a kind of similar route to kind of help people where they need to be able to go up the hill and down the hill as part of their visit. So this leads me on to what's coming up in 2024. I've spoken about lots of things, but there's some really exciting things that you can look forward to when you kind of come to the park next time. In the next couple of months. So as I said, there's new visitor and volunteer facilities coming in. We really encourage you to kind of use all the new spaces. Really excited to see how that all works. Everything will be opening up in the spring, so please do look out for kind of dates on our website and on social media, and we'll be talking to people about kind of what's coming up and when, and also on your next visit hopefully you'll see something very different. I think everything seems to be happening so quickly now and changing so quickly, so looking forward to those new spaces coming in. And as I say, obviously the Pavilion Cafe changes, and there'll be a new kiosk that's going in. So by the summer this year, there'll be lots of new kind of provisions. So, you know, all your coffee needs will be answered, hopefully. There's also expanded learning opportunities. So one of the projects that I'm particularly involved in and really excited about is a kind of new learning centre. So Greenwich Park Learning Centre will be going in, again, kind of up by the flower garden area of the park, so just down from where the new cafe is. There's a really beautiful new building that's going in, kind of very efficient and just very seamless in the landscape. So it's going to be kind of really beautiful, kind of wood and glass building with a green roof that yeah, we're really excited to kind of see. So it's a bit of an impression of it again. It's not exactly how it will look, but it's really exciting to kind of see that take shape now, and we'll be able to open that up for people to come and have a look and explore that space. We'll be running different school sessions. This is a group of school kids at one of Andrew's sort of more open days for the community archaeology digs, and there's lots of resources and learning opportunities that will be able to kind of increase now we have a space. So our learning partner, the Field Studies Council, runs lots of sessions in the park for lots of different people of different ages, and we'll also be able to kind of offer more workshops and learning opportunities from the team, and also as part of Help Nature Thrive, which is really, really exciting. So there's loads hopefully that will be coming up, and lots of school sessions. So if you are part of a school or an educator, there's lots coming up that you can introduce people to as well. And there's lots of volunteering, which is really good. So I mentioned already the mobility buggy drivers. So there's Nick and Hilary in the top left in that picture, looking very cool in the buggy. There's also volunteer rangers, so the people wearing orange around the park. So when they're in, we've got a new kiosk up by Blackheath Gate entrance, and they're able to talk to people about the park and what's happening when you see them. There's been archaeology volunteering, and then there are lots of horticulture and kind of orchard volunteering opportunities. And also I've promised my colleagues that I'll plug our new kind of wildlife conservation volunteering opportunities in the park. So there's been lots of projects so far. So they've been mulching the sweet chestnut trees to make sure their roots are protected, to make sure they don't kind of suffer in drier summers. They've been doing kind of coppicing work and willow fencing and some really interesting conservation projects, and there'll be some kind of new planting and other projects coming up. So if you're interested, I've left the kind of details there for people to sign up if they'd like to kind of join lists and be able to try something different and try something new. And this leads me to say that there's lots coming up after this. It's very exciting. We've got already Tai Chi and Tango, which I'm very excited about. So Tai Chi sessions, again, completely free for anyone to join. You just need to sign up through the Arts Trust website. And also there'll be Tango sessions coming up, which would be really, really exciting. So if anyone's interested in signing up for those, that's sort of open and ready. There are also going to be some more skate jam events, and lots of other kind of really interesting arts, well-being and kind of big open events in the open space, which we're really excited about, as well as new sessions coming up in the Learning Centre. And Tramshed are going to be running their big community opera, which is very exciting, around the music and life of Ignatius Sancho. So that's coming up soon too. And lots more that I can't talk about yet, but is coming. And we'll be able to release all of those details on, again, our website. If you're signed up to the newsletter, you'll be able to see some bits there, and also on social media. And I have the very fun task of organising posters to go around the park at lots of different times during the course of the year. So please do look out for information, and we'll be releasing a full programme of events very soon. There's one final question, which I'm going to answer now before we open up to the Q&A, which is that the deer are returning, and they're going to come back in spring 2025. They've been having a lovely holiday in Richmond Park, which is, you know, must be lovely. So they're frolicking around a nice big open space. And we're going to make sure that the habitat there is really, really suitable and completely finished, once all the building works are finished and all the noise has calmed down, they'll be coming back as well. So we have some lovely new kind of interpretation and boards with information opening up, and our existing kind of viewpoints will be there, so you'll be able to see the deer again when you come back with your families and your friends then. That was a lot of information from me, so I'm going to just say thank you very much, and I'll pass back to Richard for Q&A now. Thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you. So much going on, so much to take in, and just I don't know how you keep on top of everything that's happening there. But I can't wait to get back myself and see what's been happening in the last few months in particular, because it's really exciting stuff. We do have a load of questions. We had some submitted in advance and some that have been put in the chat, which I'll put to you. I've sort of grouped them broadly into some questions that were about specific areas of the park that people are interested in, and then there's some more general ones about the project plans. But let's start with one that's right on the nose. What are you doing in the rose garden?
It's a good question. There's a project that's going on that sort of sits alongside Greenwich Park Revealed, to make sure that the rose beds are really healthy. So after time, as I'm told, because it's not my area again, but the kind of roses that affect the soil over time, so it becomes less nutrient rich. So there's a really lovely project happening to kind of introduce wildflower mixes in with the roses. So if anyone walks through there, it's part of our butterfly transect as well, where the volunteers go through, and you can see lovely sort of species, and it's really making sure that they're like thriving in that space. So it should be really beautiful, and there'll be a real range of colours and sort of planting mixes coming up.
Sounds lovely, and that'll start to take shape in
so it's sort of it's upcoming. So the work's sort of been being done. So all of the planting should sort of be in for this summer, I think.
Fantastic, amazing. And along similar lines, so the areas of acid grassland, which are so important for wildlife, how are you looking after those areas?
So I know that Heather and the ecology team in particular has been going around making sure that any species of different things is being picked up, including kind of moving specimens where we need to, so they're not disrupted. But there are big areas of acid grassland, especially at the top of the park near the new learning centre, and in other spaces of the park that are being preserved. So as best as we can, we're making sure that they're kind of continuing to be used. So there's lots of kind of nice projects going on to make sure that the acid grassland is maintained.
Brilliant. Okay, and sort of again along similar lines, the tumuli areas. So, is there expected to be any impact on those, or are they being looked after in any particular way?
So again, they're being looked after. There's sort of specific mowing regimes around the park to make sure that there are longer grasses in lots of areas where possible, and that there's certain areas around there you'll also see there's sort of longer grass. But a lot of the kind of decisions around there also to protect the tumuli, so the burial mounds, to make sure nothing happens to them. And actually the removal of the path will help with that maintaining of those areas, so people aren't kind of walking like as by them, and there's not that tarmac path there anymore. So hopefully that's a positive change.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. And then there was a couple of questions about particular things that you've mentioned. So there was one about the location of the Ignatius Sancho plaque in Greenwich Park. This was submitted in advance. So there's a plaque to him somewhere. Is there? Where can that be found?
Yeah, so there's the existing kind of memorial plaque to Ignatius Sancho and to Queen Caroline by the bath that's just before the rose gardens on that corner of the park. But really excitingly, there's a separate committee, so it's not necessarily part of the park, so they've been working with them to create a new sculpture, sort of relief sculpture of Ignatius Sancho to sit with that lovely memorial plaque that's there. So that's coming again very soon. So hopefully by the spring when you come back, that will be there, and we'll be drawing people's attention to it, so you know where to find it.
Brilliant. And you mentioned the sleeping giant sculpture at the beginning as well, and someone put in the chat asking where they can find that. I had a sneaky look on Google Maps and it's not marked on there.
No,
So
it's not. I
well,
know it's
well hidden.
it's very tucked away, and this is why I think it's so lovely, because the Wildlife Centre before was only open obviously for specific days and for learning sessions, and the new Greenwich Park Learning Centre will be sort of open for specific days as well. But when we have our open day, hopefully, I think it'll be around May, people will be able to come in and see that sculpture, because it has been tucked away for so long. So I was wondering if anyone's seen it before, maybe if they've been at a session. But yeah, it's one of my favourites. So hopefully you'll be able to see that if you come by on one of the open days.
Hunt that down. And then onto questions, sort of more general questions about the project. So there's one sort of pre-submitted about whether the park will be closed off during the work. Obviously there'll be, local closures for certain periods of time. Are there any sort of significant closures of areas coming up in the coming year that people should be aware of? Or?
No, so even with the Blackheath Gate sort of works, there'll always be access into the park, and we'll make sure that any kind of changes that are coming up, the comms team are really good at making sure. I mean, Zoe is a trooper, and make sure there's always signage going up, so that you know what is open and not. But there will never be sort of the complete park closure unless, for some reason we have really, really bad like strong stormy winds or something. So we'll always be kind of fully open.
Fantastic. And then there was a question, I think, from Joe about benches in the park. So you touched on the transport services for people who have mobility issues. As part of the new development, so is there more sort of seating, more benches going to be available for people that have those sorts of challenges?
Yeah, so some of the seating's already been improved, and there are some new benches going in slightly different areas, and also some of the benches, I don't know if people noticed, but sort of been restored and updated, which is really good. So sorry, apologies, lots of talking. So there should be some lots of sort of open seating and sort of comfortable areas to make sure people are looked after.
Yeah, brilliant. Fantastic. There is I think this might be a request for a frisbee golf course in the park. I don't think I've come across frisbee golf courses before. How's
really
that
exciting. I know there are so many spaces that we're kind of keeping for sports as well. So there are lots of open spaces, and exactly for people to enjoy and do a range of sports and activities. So I don't think we're going to put in a specific course, but it sounds really exciting if you're doing that.
Going to have to look one of those up and have a go. I think it sounds fun. And then I think we probably ought to finish up. I think there's one question here. This is a nice one to finish on. It's further reading. So Mariangela, I hope I've said your name right there. Are there any publications about the park? So where are there? Obviously, there's our website. There's lots of information on there. But are there any other? Do you have any good publications or books or anything like that where people can find out more about the background of the park?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are lots out there. A couple that pop into my head now are Chris Hawkins, who's a member of the Friends, has written a really fantastic book about the park's history with lots of his research, and we work with him as part of that group, and we're doing some interesting projects together this year as well. So definitely recommend Chris Hawkins' book. And I also read Patterson Joseph's book on Charles Ignatius Sancho, and it's a really fascinating kind of almost like a novel read into his life. So it's called A Secret Diary of Charles Ignatius Sancho, which is really interesting and provides a slightly different perspective on the park. But there's also a crime novel, I think, that's based in the park, and lots of other things. So there's kind of more factual like background into the park, but there's also some really interesting stories and again, like bringing different perspectives and connections to the park. So there's lots to have a look at.
Yeah, I'll just have to look some of those up. Thank you, and thank you so much, Daniela, for a wonderful presentation, and thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight as well. If you have enjoyed it and would like to make a donation to support our work as a charity, to look after Greenwich Park and the other royal parks, then the link is in the chat. I'm just posting that in now, along with a link to our future online talks, so the rest of the Winter Warmer series, and our walking tours and other in-person events that we run in the parks as well. I must give a special mention for the next in our Winter Warmer online talk series, which is on the 22nd of February. and we'll be focusing on the oldest of the royal parks and its weird and wonderful animal residents. So please do, if you haven't already, sign up to join our wildlife officer Nick to delve into the history of animals in St James's Park. We're going to hear about the park's most famous residents, our modern day dinosaurs, the pelicans, and we'll find out about the future of wildlife in the park and how we're working on conservation there in the heart of London. It's going to be a fascinating evening, and again, available to you for free, so please don't miss it. And you can sign up through the link that I put there in the chat. I hope to see you there. So thank you again, Daniela, and thank you also for joining tonight. Do enjoy the rest of your evening, and we hope to see you soon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.